So welcome everyone to the Vermont Resilient Food Systems Infrastructure Program Applicant webinar. Really happy to have everybody here. My name is Julia Shire. I use she, her pronouns. I work in the Agriculture Development Division at the Agency of Agriculture and will be supporting this two-track grant program. And happy to be here to share a little bit and answer some questions. I'm also joined by a few colleagues, and Gina Clitheroe is here to be helping watch the chat and take notes, and I think Abby Willard is also here. I will kind of start off by just saying this is new one-time funding from USDA. We are super excited to have a good little chunk in Vermont to give out. It is also a bit of a new and unwieldy program. And so just really appreciate your patience. If we don't have all of the answers to your questions today, we'll work hard to get them ASAP as we're all kind of learning about this grant. Go ahead and share my screen.
That's fascinating.
Great. Gina, can you see that screen share okay?
I can. I am flagging that there are some folks, Julie and Doug, that are unmuted right now. If there's a way to mute them, or if everyone can mute themselves, that'd be great.
Great, thank you. Perfect. So we'll dive right in. Again, I'll go through a little bit of a presentation and have plenty of time at the end for any questions, but feel free to put your questions in the chat. Hoping that everyone has access in the chat. Gina, maybe if you could put my email in the chat also, just in case people can see it but can't put it in, and at the end we'll unmute everyone and take questions. So again, welcome to the Resilient Food Systems Infrastructure, or RFSI, a little bit of a mouthful, our applicant webinar. So as I said, this is one-time new USDA funding. The purpose is to build resilience in the middle of the food supply chain, to expand markets for small farms and food businesses, to support the development of value-added products, and to support local communities and workers. This grant is targeted toward the middle of the supply chain, which is a little bit of a wonky term, but it's basically everything in between farming and production and retail, or the consumer-facing side of things. So that includes things like aggregation, processing, manufacturing, storing, transporting, wholesaling, or distribution. It's really targeted toward local and regional agricultural products, and regional is defined as within 400 miles. And one of the notable exclusions is that meat and poultry is not eligible under this grant per USDA stipulations. So in Vermont, we have two tracks of grants that we're going to be administering through the Vermont Agency of Agriculture. The first one is in process right now. We're calling this the infrastructure grants. And so there's about $2 million that's going to be available in this track. The award ranges are going to be from $100,000 to $500,000 per award. There is a 50% match required. There is an ability to have a reduced match down to 25% for eligible applicants, which we'll get into in a second. The RFA, the request for applications, which outlines all the details of eligibility and timeline and process, application questions, and our scoring criteria, was released about 2 weeks ago on April 17th. That's online. Applications will open tomorrow, May 1st, and they'll close on June 5th at 1:59. So it's not midnight, it's right before 2 on June 5th. And then projects will begin in the fall of 2024 and go into early 2027. There's also a separate equipment only grant track, which there's about 1.2 million available for that. See, hearing a bad echo. Gina, are you also hearing that echo?
I'm not.
Okay. See, Hildy, I'm not sure why that would be happening. Did just mute everyone again in case that was the problem. Is anyone else hearing about echo?
I'm hearing a little bit of one.
Interesting.
No echo here.
Yeah, I apologize about that. I'm not sure if there's anything I can do on my end, but maybe keep flagging it if it keeps coming up for multiple people. Happy to connect with people one-on-one too if that's becoming problematic. So the equipment only grant track, there's about 1.2 million available. The award ranges are smaller. They're from 30,000 to 100,000 per award. There's no match for that. The RFA for that will be released in August of this year. Projects will begin in early 2025. And then our decision process for each of these two tracks, is pretty much our standard one at the agency. We'll have 3 reviewers that will be a combination of internal Agency of Agriculture folks and external partners or subject matter experts. We'll then have some internal review meetings where we will discuss the scores, but we'll also have broader holistic discussions around the slate of applicants. So it's not strictly who scores the highest gets awarded, but it's more of a holistic discussion around if there were outliers in the scores or if reviewers maybe had positive or negative assumptions that would change things. We will also be striving for equity in terms of size and scale and types of projects, locations around the state, just trying to use this funding to the best of our ability. And then we will submit those recommendations to USDA for final approval. They will send your kind of project profile, which is basically what you submitted in your application. USDA does reserve the right to ask questions, to ask for changes to the budget or to the project. So that process might take a few months once we send them the final packages. Great, so these infrastructure grant projects, so again, the grant that's about to open tomorrow, these are for projects that expand capacity and infrastructure for aggregation, processing, manufacturing, storing, transporting, wholesale, or distribution. So things like expanding processing capacities, modernizing equipment or facilities, purchasing and installing specialized equipment, modernizing manufacturing, tracking, storage, and IT systems, constructing a new facility, increasing packaging and labeling capacities that meet compliance requirements, increasing storage space, including cold storage, or upgrading to climate smart equipment or systems. So eligible applicants are agricultural producers or processors, for-profit entities. There's a little asterisk about the size of for-profits that's outlined in the RFA. Nonprofits, local government entities, institutions, places like food banks. Again, the applicants must have projects that adhere to the spirit of RFSI. So it must be supporting local or regional agricultural products or ingredients. So again, within 400 miles. It must support increased market access. So this is not for on-site retail projects, such as a farm that's looking to improve their on-site farm stand, or for a small market or farm market that's doing aggregation of products from a bunch of different farms kind of in the back of the house, but all of that is going out in their on-site retail. That this would not be the right match for that project. So as I noted, there's a few exclusions with RFSI. Meat and poultry is the biggest one. Again, these are USDA stipulations. Other items are wild-caught seafood, animal feed and forage products, fiber, landscaping products, tobacco, dietary supplements, And then also excluding the purchase of land, buildings, or facilities, marketing projects, waste management, because there are other funding in Vermont for that. And again, a project that's solely based on production or farming, or a project that's based on retail or consumer facing spaces. So what could these sorts of projects look like? Things like upgrading post-harvest handling space and equipment, like dry and cold storage or cleaning or grading equipment, expanding the aggregators, warehouse and storage, or expanding an existing facility, constructing on-farm processing space or value-added space, enhancing packaging and labeling equipment or HACCP plans and training for staff, modernizing on-farm value-add facilities for efficiency, maybe having some climate-smart equipment, food safety, or creating new product types, increasing food hub capacity or tracking systems to reach new markets, refrigerated trucks and inventory systems to deliver to new markets, just some examples. So RFSI is intended to prioritize projects who will benefit those who have historically not had access to capital or markets. So projects that will support limited resource farmers, new and beginning farmers, or veteran farmers, or food producers, food business owners will have some prioritization, and that's reflected in the scoring criteria that's outlined in the RFA that's online. This is the same 3 categories of folks that would be eligible for that reduced match down to 25%. And there's a detailed definition of each of these: limited resource, which is around income, new and beginning, and veteran farmers or producers. So for example, if there was a food hub somewhere that could that was really trying to purchase from farms that self-identified as one or more of these 3 categories, and they could really make an argument that their purchasing habits and outreach and relationships are going to really strengthen farms that have these designations, then that would receive a little bit more priority. There is no kind of proof of the status of folks. For the reduced match, it is a self-certification. USDA does ask you to check the box of which category you're self-certifying as. If folks have any questions around that, I know that it's sensitive information, please just reach out and we can kind of work our way through that. There might be some leeway of not needing to maybe disclose all of that unless folks are awarded. We understand that it's sensitive information, and that USDA is really trying to make an effort to prioritize access to projects for these groups and the reduced match. So just another plug and reminder that if you just need equipment, it could be wise to wait until the equipment only round. That RFA release again is going to be in August of this year. Applications will open in the early fall. And again, we'll need to get USDA approval for that. So projects will likely not start until early 2025. Again, there's about 1.2 million available. There's somewhat smaller awards between 30,000 and 100,000. There is no match. However, all of the RFSI stipulations still apply. So if you solely just need a piece of equipment to replace something that's not working well, but it will not have an impact on reaching a new market or doing a new product or starting to do value add or processing, this is likely not the right fit for you. So you can, even if you're thinking about applying to the equipment only, I'd encourage you to look through the RFA for this current infrastructure grant just to get a sense of all the stipulations and kind of what USDA is elevating in terms of their outcomes and priorities, because likely a lot of that will be the same for the equipment only, even if we're hoping it's a bit of an easier application process. Folks can apply to both tracks, but they will only be awarded one. So we really encourage folks to think about what is the best fit for their business and to pick one track. Obviously, the infrastructure would be bigger projects with multiple expenses. There, of course, is the match. So if you apply to the infrastructure grant, which is opening tomorrow, you will know if you're being recommended to USDA for an award prior to the equipment only opening. So you'll find out, if you're moving forward. It's not a guarantee just because USDA still reserves the right to change projects or to deny them, but at least you'll know if you have a pretty good shot of getting this grant. Again, you're welcome to apply to both. We encourage you to think about which one is the best fit, and you would only be awarded one. Great. So the application requirements, again, this is all outlined in a lot of detail in the RFA that's online. We'll put a link in the chat if we haven't already. So there are some kind of basic questions around business size and scope, about what your project description is, what the need is, your timeline. There's also questions about objectives, about those beneficiaries, if you're meeting some of those targeted groups. And then there's a list of very specific outcomes. You do not need to meet all of them, but we do ask for numerical values around at least one outcome. So that's something definitely to look at in the RFA as you're thinking about if this is the right match for you. There's also very detailed budgets for each line item. Things like, travel needs to be broken down into, hotel cost and meal cost or whatever it is. So I encourage you to also look at the need for the real detailed budgets to make sure that you have all that math worked out. As I said, the match for this infrastructure grant is at least 50% or the 25% for the reduced match. That match is based on the project that's eligible for RFSI. So again, I'll just use the food hub example. If you're a food hub and you're looking to renovate your aggregation and storage space and put in some dry and cold storage and some equipment and some food safety plans, but you're also going to have a little retail kind of cafe and store with some of your products that's on the same site. The RFSI portion is only the food hub aggregator space. It's not the retail space because that's not eligible because it's retail. So the match would need to be at least 50% of the storage and aggregation, not the total cost of the complex that includes the cafe, if that makes sense. For the match, USDA does require that you show how you're funding the full RFSI project. So if that food hub aggregator space is incredibly expensive, many millions of dollars, you'll need to show how you're funding the rest of it, even if that's technically a match that's more than 50%. So that 50 or 25% is the minimum if it's a really expensive project. I know it's a lot of detail. We're almost there. USDA also requires match verification letters. So if you have, a loan that you're using as a match or what have you, you'll need a letter from that institution. So that's also something to think about in terms of your timeline of applying, that you're going to need those letters. There is a template provided that hopefully is pretty easy to fill in. There's also an evidence of critical resources and infrastructure letter that's required. There is a template available that's just kind of saying that like the land and the building and all of that is ready to go. There is also an environmental review questionnaire for NEPA, which is the National Environmental Protection. This questionnaire is a fillable PDF that's a bit of a screener of whether you're going to need to go through the NEPA process. That process can be a little daunting. We'll be blunt about that. It's usually for larger projects that are ground disturbing projects, but not exclusively. So that questionnaire will help flag to you, if you're clicking yes, that applies to my project, you're probably going to need to explore the bigger NEPA process. We can help work with you to figure out if you probably will need to go through NEPA and to try to connect you with the right resources. But that is potentially a big process that can take time. and potentially, money to go through that process. So we can work with folks kind of one-on-one to help connect to some resources. The USDA also requires a NICRA if you have a negotiated indirect cost rate that's more than 10%. You need to add that letter if you're asking for an indirect as part of your budget. We also require a letter of support and a letter of commitment, and the difference between those are outlined in the RFA. There's an optional space to upload things like financials or a business plan or a strategic plan or additional letters of support. We did decide not to require that for a few different reasons, but really welcome if you have financial documents or things like business plans or strategic plans about the value of this project. We really welcome and encourage you to include that. We also really encourage you to think about additional letters of support or commitment if there are different players or kind of parts of the food system that would really benefit from this project. We always appreciate kind of hearing from outside folks of the value. Great, so the scoring criteria, again, it's all detailed in the RFA. We will be scoring on things like project impact and the expected outcomes, project readiness, timeline, and technical expertise, community impact and project beneficiaries, clarity of the budget and the match, business viability and financial management, your letters of support and commitment. And then we also have a holistic score from 1 to 5 and narrative comments that reviewers give around strengths or weaknesses or kind of other considerations. Payment provisions and reporting. So upon signing the grant agreement, if you are awarded, which would likely be in mid-fall of this year, you're eligible to make a claim for 40% of the total grant. That's also assuming that all your paperwork and W-9 and all that is in. And then we will be able to offer a claim for the next 40% upon completion of the midway interim report, so about halfway through the project. And then the final 20% will be dispersed upon the final report. So that's going to be late winter, early spring of 2027. So it's important to note that that last 20% will need to be front-loaded by the organization that is offered after the end of the grant. If there are concerns about payment provisions, we could speak about those on a case-by-case basis if you're awarded. There are no pre-award costs, and the exact start date is a little bit dependent on how quickly USDA approves projects, or there might be some back and forth of, one budget item isn't allowable, so we need to change things and make sure it still works for the project. So just also noting that the exact start date is a little bit TBD. As are the exact reporting needs. We're working to get that from USDA on the timing and the details of what the reporting will look like. Great. We also wanted to just mention that there is kind of a separate element of the RFSI funding that each state receives. We're calling this the supply chain coordination piece. It's separate funding from our RFSI package. It's about $1 million. And this is for state level support for middle of the supply chain businesses, kind of over and above these grants that we're putting out. This includes things like business assistance and technical assistance. There is also likely limited application support for folks that are looking to apply to either track. Details about that are coming very soon. If you're interested, please email me directly and I can connect you with the right folks. It is limited, but we're looking to really support folks that are looking to submit applications and potentially for some project kind of support if you are awarded. This funding will also go toward overseeing some contracts for supply chain kind of research around the state that's separate than the grant, including potentially things like asset mapping or really figuring out the needs of the middle of the supply chain in the state and putting some funding toward research or support people to help with that. We also have just hired a navigator staff position for the agency that's directly from this funding, and they will be available to help connect resources and funding options for middle of the supply chain businesses. Again, separate and kind of over and above any support that we'll offer to the grantees. This is really meant to be statewide support that's separate but complementary to the grantees. So more details on that exact kind of scope and position very soon. That's it. So if you have any questions, I'll put my contact information in the chat. Please feel free to reach out to me sooner rather than later would be great. We are putting a frequently asked questions. It's already multiple pages long, so I'm hoping it's helpful. As I get questions from folks, I'll add that to the FAQ so it's public, and my aim is to update it at least weekly, more if needed. So it's really helpful to hear questions from folks. I'm going to stop sharing. Perfect. So I know that was a lot of information. Again, we're really excited about this grant, and we appreciate that there are multiple complexities, maybe even more than a standard federal grant. So we really appreciate that and appreciate your patience as we kind of go through all those details. I'm going to start kind of looking at feel free to put your question in the chat or raise your hand. So if scoring focuses on business viability and financial management, where in the RFA application do you address these? There's not appear to be questions specifically addressing these aspects. So Rose, I can connect with you individually on that. Just pulling that up. I believe that we had a narrative question that was meant to be toward the financial management kind of viability, that folks were able to speak kind of directly to that in a narrative sense rather than the financial documents, but I'll make sure that that is in there and clear to folks. Can we apply for both the supply chain coordination project and the infrastructure? Also, is rent eligible for either? So thanks, Lindsay. The supply chain coordination is the name of the kind of separate carve out of that $1 million of statewide support that is over and above the grantee support. So they're going to be doing a lot of work that we'll kind of be announcing soon. For the two grant tracks, the infrastructure is the one that's open now. That's the bigger projects, and the equipment only is later this summer. You can apply to both. You can only be awarded one. So we encourage folks to really think about what's the best fit for their business. But you're welcome to apply to both. If you decide to apply to the infrastructure that's opening now, you will know in early August if you're being recommended to the USDA for funding. Obviously,
yes,
you're not.
Sorry, I understood that from the presentation. I didn't know if the supply chain coordination was another potential grant coming out later. I was confused.
Yeah, thanks, Lindsay. Yeah, so not a separate grant, but that will be available, to the best of our ability and capacity for all folks, regardless of if they've applied or not applied or gotten awarded to the grant.
Great. And is rent eligible? I saw purchasing a building is not. So
yes, so purchasing is not. Rent is an eligible expense.
it is.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Perfect. Again, it's all about, making sure that you're able to make the argument that the rental of the space is meeting the needs. If it's rental of a space that's like dual purpose, or the other awkward piece is that meat and poultry and seafood is not eligible. So you would want to prorate that for the allowable cost. So if meat was 15% of the space, you'd then be asking for 85% of the cost of the rent.
That makes sense. Okay, thanks.
And encourage folks to be as very clear as possible in your application, especially with some of these nuances. It's stuff that you work in every day, but for reviewers, it's really helpful if you're very blunt and clear about kind of how you're coming to decisions or to costs in your budget. I'm going to take one more from Rose. Funding will be focused on projects that are submitted by cooperatives, farmer, and worker-owned enterprises. How does this impact businesses applying that do not fall into this category? Will they be competitive? Yes, they will definitely be competitive. The USDA is interested in supporting kind of cooperatives or worker-owned enterprises as one of their priorities. I think that will probably come into play in terms of the equitability when we're looking at the final slew of applicants. It would be great to have a variety of different kind of models and streams, but definitely other folks will be competitive. I'm going to go to Randy. I think you should be able to unmute, Randy.
Okay, do you hear me?
Yes.
At the beginning, you said the definition of local and regional was within 400 miles. And then I thought you said something, I think you said something else that I missed that was something about that was not included.
Yes, so the definition is in the RFA. It's in Vermont or within 400 miles. I believe that is also with, I need to triple check if Canada applies to that. I don't know if there was another piece to that. I will say that if you are a food business that is creating a product that has multiple ingredients, and some of the ingredients are local or regional and some are not, that is allowable, but potentially not as competitive. And it just depends a little bit on the exact, makeup of ingredients and what the product is. And if you have questions about that, feel free to reach out to me directly to kind of talk through each example. We really we want lots of folks to apply and be excited, but are trying to be really transparent around criteria and competitiveness. So for example, if you're making, sauerkraut with a bunch of local cabbage and, carrots or whatever, and you have a tiny bit of salt that's not local, that would likely not impact things. If you are making, pasta sauce and you're able to use local tomatoes for 2 months of the year, but then you're importing from outside of 400 miles for the rest of the year, that's not going to be as competitive. And that I might consider that kind of pushing into ineligible because there's such a quantity of product that's not regional.
Okay, and you said you're not sure about Canada. You're going to look into that.
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Great. Global Village. Go ahead.
Yes, hi. Thank you all for a great presentation. So the question is, if you have a business model that is focused on sourcing a maximum amount of local and regional vegetable products, and again, you say within 400 miles, so presuming that means Mass, Connecticut, upstate New York, places like that.
Yeah.
And so your entire model is maximizing the sourcing of local produce and local ingredients for folding into product lines into institutional food service and other high volume channels. I'm assuming that that project would be recognized as in the wheelhouse of building that middle of the supply chain construct, and would be prioritized accordingly.
Yes. So, and there's lots more details in the RFA, and happy to chat offline also. But if the work of the project is either creating a new product or gaining access to bigger markets or institutions, I think in your example, and you're able to increase the production or the type of products that you're offering to be able to enter into new markets or to increase the worker satisfaction or rate of pay or food safety, worker safety, et cetera, kind of in that venture, then that would qualify.
Now, how much does it help to be able to show as a for instance, that if you got products 1 through 5, and you can actually show at a projected increase of sales within that product base, you should be able to pull X amount of regionally or locally sourced produce as a percentage. This also goes into another question of ESG, because there's a local and sustainable push from institutional purchasers surrounding ESG requirements on sustainability. And so if you're able to track that, how, in what way does that impact, again, the positioning of the overall project?
Yeah, so the whole focus is really on the local and regional product. So if you can make an argument that you're, doing that or able to increase, that's very much in line. If only some of the ingredients of your product are local and regional, and it will stay that way, even if it's a decent percentage, there's still non-regional ingredients going in, that will make the project less competitive, just because it's not as big of an impact to local and regional ingredients. You're still needing to source from non-regional places. So that is a question of competitiveness, not a question of eligibility. The outcomes are listed on page 19 of the RFA. There is not an explicit kind of emphasis on the sustainability or the other aspects that you were talking about. However, if that is an element of your project, and if that is also an ability to enter a market or an institution that has set forth, certain values in their procurement that you're able to meet, and therefore you're able to get into that market by meeting those values, I think that's definitely very much worthy of being included in the application. There's not a specific scoring criteria that's kind of connected to that, but if it's part of your overall narrative of why you're doing this, why it's important, why it makes sense in your business model, can go in those spaces.
Thank you.
Clear. Yeah. I'm gonna pop over to the chat. From Amy, can you share an example of new construction and if Act 250 impacts that? Yes. So any permitting of any kind, including Act 250, all comes into play if it's applicable. So new construction could be something like again, I'll just use a food hub example of a food hub that's looking to construct a new warehouse space adjacent to their current property. You can't use these funds to buy the land, but you could use it to build new construction. Or on a farm, if a farm traditionally has not done any value added or kind of processing, but they're interested in that, they could build a processing facility kind of next to their wash pack house to do some value added. And that project, again, not purchasing the land, but constructing the building, equipment to go in, food safety planning, worker training for that new space, some supplies, all of those would be eligible costs, as long as that value add is the product is in line with RFSI. So there's an ability to reach new markets, or there's new product being made available. That helps. Great, Annie.
Thanks so much for offering this time to clarify. My question centers around the quote future supply chain coordination project piece. And I am interested in understanding where technical and business assistance can intersect with these RFSI pieces. There is always a interplay between marketing, which is not covered under RFSI, and helping businesses understand how to reach institutional and/or retail markets. And I'm just kind of, and this is maybe something to take offline, but looking at where the business development services can play a role, because many people don't understand, say, for instance, if they were looking to move their product through to an institutional market, they don't understand third-party audits,
Yeah.
insurance, meeting the demands of the distributors that they're using. So that's kind of, that's kind of an angle that I lean into. And I
Yeah.
want to see if there's a place for me in this supply chain coordination piece that also intersects with the needs of the RSFI, or should I look at it as a separate entity altogether to kind of move forward in the technical assistance? Thanks so
Sure.
much.
Yeah, thanks so much, Annie. I think it'd be great to have that conversation offline, just because I know there's a lot of different moving pieces to that. I'm also going to flag if Abby or Trevor want to add anything, please jump in. We have been chatting with partners about kind of what the needs for the supply chain coordination and what the middle of the supply chain needs are around the state. So we'd love to connect with you for the examples you just gave, and I'm sure there's many more. We have not yet solidified exactly the breakdown of that funding or the kind of business advising and technical assistance aspect of that, but hoping to get more information about that ASAP, especially with our new staff member.
And you'd be sharing that widely with, obviously, with this group?
Yes, you mean the plan?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Just, kind of like what might fall into it, what might not. I mean, obviously there's a lot of different angles that need to be considered when it's great to make the products and stuff, but we got to get them to the markets, and we have to also, that also ties into that mapping of the assets piece to me as well. So thanks again.
Definitely. Yeah, and we're really thinking of this work, and again, with we're just kind of finalizing our relationships with a few partners, and are just getting this new staff member coming on board very shortly. So the first, task for all of that is really to map out the needs of kind of what are all the aspects of the middle of the supply chain, what is the best use of these funds to make the most impact, and who's the right kind of people and partners to be doing that. So we'll definitely have more details about that coming out
Thanks again.
shortly, and we'll connect with you. Thanks, Annie. Great. Go back to the chat. Again, appreciate there's a lot of details that might not be applicable to everyone, so thanks for hanging in there. If you are applying for the infrastructure track, can equipment be included in the project, or is equipment only covered in the equipment track? So you can definitely include equipment in the infrastructure track. Obviously, you cannot include anything but equipment in the equipment only. Also, if you lease the property for your farm, what is required from your landlord? Just a letter of support? Yes, so that would definitely would be great to have that letter of support from your landlord, especially if there's like construction or, more permanent things happening. The lease does not impact the allowability of the grant, other than it's really helpful to again explain, how long you've had the lease, that it's stable, that that is sometimes a flag for reviewers of just questioning putting large investments into space that might not be there for a long time. So any information that you can provide, definitely the letter of support is really helpful. As much detail as can be in that letter is also really helpful. Just kind of, again, giving that full picture of here's our business model, here's why it makes sense to make this investment on this land or this property in this way. Annie, is that a new hand? I'd assume that's an old hand from Annie. Great. Any other questions? We will be posting the recording of this online. I will also put the website for the RFSI. This has, again, that request for applications, the RFA that has all the details. the FAQ document, which I'm hoping is really helpful. Please also look through that to see if your questions are answered in there. And please do reach out to me if you have any other questions. And anything else from folks? Great. Thank you so much for your time. We will respond to any, thanks, Gina. We'll respond to any individual questions back to the email that you used when you register. We'll also include those in the FAQ so other folks can see that. Again, please feel free to reach out with any and all questions, especially if you're interested in application or business support. Even though we don't have all those details fleshed out right now, it's really helpful to just reach out so we can get you in the queue. And thank you again so much, and looking forward to connecting with you all one way or another. Yes, so no meat or poultry or seafood products, regardless of if it's raw or value add. Great. Thanks all. Have a great afternoon.
Julia, can I ask one quick question on that?